And the other issue, because we are talking a lot to corporates and various corporates whom we really look up to and we learn a lot from every day, some kind of resistance to what they call checkbook philanthropy. Said we're not interested in checkbook philanthropy. And Anisha and Tihani have had to kick me under the table to shut me up. But I've said often, actually I do actually write a check and sign it, and it goes to a grantee and they take it. And then I trust in them to do what they've said they'll do. So that piece is still missing. And that I think is something that corporations should think about, that there are experts in the field who have been doing this for 30 years. And they are the content experts, they are the political experts, they are the social experts, and they need to know. And they need to be trusted on that.
Tulika ji, if I may respond, I mean, unfortunately, it'll get even more difficult now. Because of the CSR regulations, checkbook philanthropy from corporates is over. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's reality now. So, if you're looking for checkbook philanthropy, you will now have to go to individual personal foundations. Okay. So that's where you'll probably get it from. Corporates now, the rules and guidelines in terms of reporting are so tight that at least in the initial years, you won't get that check. I'm sorry, it is there. Yeah.
I think that's a good point mentioned, because I think what is of concern to many of us around the world maybe is that the corporates are implementing their own foundation programs. And so if you're talking about a transformatory potential, then how do you make the space for that to enter what they're implementing? I know there are many hands up, and I don't know how to do justice to all of you, but let me take, Subbalakshmi, I'll come to you. There was one here. Yeah, please. And then I will come there. I will come there. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much, Vijay Chaddaji. You are doing very good job in education. But which this Indian government is not focusing at all. So my question is you that what kind of syllabus you are adopting for your education? Is it NCERT? And if it is NCERT, then it itself is gender discriminatory. And another is that are you involving movements people in your teaching schools, because the issues social sector has and the struggle is going on, because that is new for your children for growing for progressive thinking. And second question is that what are your measurements, indicators for measuring that complete man, that values you are teaching? So are you doing some external review for that, or you are doing your own review and then saying that you are doing very good job? Another question is that you are saying that you are changing mindset of the parents, but is it that only that mindset of the parents? My experience in working in rural areas says that it's more than that, because poor people wants to teach their daughter, but there are another things which are not letting them do. That is, you can understand that caste-based discrimination and that sexual harassment when the distance of the schools from villages. So what you are thinking about that? I want to know.
Question. One question, please.
Very quickly, one is to come in. But how is media you as an influencer to the corporate media so that they are open to represent policies? And one, to you, Vanessa, that we want to understand that you have schools in these districts, you want to have government schools. Have you thought of activating government schools and putting these infrastructure there? They are already there. And last is, how are you looking at your
Shall I start? I am Rasmila from Nepal. I have a question to Tulika. You have rightly mentioned that the funds are shortening for advocacy work or women's work. Apart from that, I was experiencing in Nepal, maybe other countries as well, for the name of sustainability and for the name of, monitoring and evaluation of programs. Now now the donors are coming up with requiring results in binaries for advocacy programs. And there are so many, for small organizations like NGOs to come up with all those requirements, different donor organizations, funding organizations having different formats, different requiring for formats and everything to fill up with. And which takes large amount of organizations to fulfilling requirements, and the funding are very for a short time, for example 3 years funding, and they would really require results in binaries. And how are you taking up with these issues? How are you thinking, are you approaching to funding partners on these issues? Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm James from Namibia, Men Engage Namibia. I often wonder what women's empowerment means within a patriarchal system. The notion around, does empowering the girl child when it comes to education really, provide for equality within the household setting? What does that look like? I have concerns around that. How are we challenging the broader structural issues around our societies? And then there's really the issue around the media, which has such a huge impact when it comes to using gender exploitative strategies to sell their products. I think that's what the gentleman over there was trying to say. In my country, we have major issues where, the norm is, if the product is about babies, the message is directed towards women, which then reinforces the stereotype that, women are the ones responsible for childcare. So when do we begin to transform our messages so that it's inclusive of men, and it creates a new norm that men also have a space when it comes to childcare and they should be involved in parenting? Thank you.
Yeah, I just, after I heard Nalin, I just remembered one incident. I remember at the National Commission for Women many years ago, there was a consultation on sexual harassment at workplace. And I was there, and at that time I was working with the Times of India. And there was somebody from the HR department who was also there. And I remember him announcing at that consultation that they had a committee that in line with the Bishaka guidelines. And it came as a big surprise to me because I didn't know about it. And I made an announcement over there. So the point I think which Nalin also was trying to say, and I'm also saying, is that it's not just saying, okay, we've set up a committee and the HR department decides, okay, we've set up this committee, but you also have to ensure that people know about it, and it's put on all the notice boards and all. Well, at that time, emails were not really in fashion. I mean, it wasn't in a different era altogether that I'm talking about. So it's just a thought that came to me. It's an incident that kind of came back to me when I was listening to Nalin. The other thing I was talking, Mr. Chadda, I just wanted to ask about Bharti. You told us about Bharti Foundation, but I just wanted to know, in Bharti, your organization, how are you addressing the issue of gender balance and gender diversity, and to what extent are women also involved in these programs? Whether it's your CSR programs or anything else. Within the organization, what is gender balance? What is the situation?
Thank you. I have two questions. I'm Rashmi Sehgal. I'm a senior journalist. One is to Nalin. You spoke about the Telka incident and, of course, the fact that the Vishaka guidelines were not very well known. Just to add to this a little bit, and maybe to get your response, is the extreme amount of sexual harassment that is taking place in the Hindi and regional television channels. And to the extent that 2 months ago we had a well-known anchor attempting to commit suicide. So this is the extreme levels to which, maybe there is an awareness amongst journalists of the guidelines, or maybe it is not so well known in, say, in our smaller cities. but the fact that, to get your responses to, you've been in the administrative section, what is the response to the situation? And to you, Mr. Chadda, I would want to ask you, you've spoken a great deal about CSR responsibility, and which is very, in a sense, it's admirable. But my experience in corporate, in reporting, and especially on environmental issues, is that I was in Sonbhadra district a couple of weeks ago, and the kind of mercury poisoning, the kind of pollution that is being caused by corporates in the entire area there, its impact is affecting the lives of thousands of children. Now, this has been extensively reported, and you have all the leading corporates in India having a presence there, starting from Reliance. You have the Birla Group there. You have all these people, and they will do some kind of token measure, It'll be a small token measure, but it does nothing to try and, mitigate the kind of environmental degradation, the kind of extreme levels of pollution that is being caused in the air, the water, etc. And also just the people who are working there, whether they're the employees, and so that seems to create some sort of a dichotomy in this, So what?
Last question, I think, Subulakshmi. I know your hand is
So I'm Subulakshmi, and I've been with the feminist movement. In this panel, I would also like to say that I work with UN Women. That's not an introduction I've been giving in other panels, but I think it's important here because my question is mainly for Tulika, and I want to reflect on a couple of things that you said, which we completely identify with as an organization that is committed to the vision and mandate for women's rights, but sometimes struggling with the systems and operational and the larger political economy, as it were. I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on people like us, South Asia Women's Fund, UN Women, particularly responsive bilaterals, maybe coming together as a caucus, which I think was the reality of the early 90s is what I've heard. I was in school and college, but I have heard about those times. And Sunita is perhaps also the best person to respond to something like that. Do you think that is a good idea for us to reorganize again as institutions that are involved in resource mobilization, but also in education? Because I think another important role we play in resource mobilization is also education. What will be the terms of engagement with the private sector? Do we have a set of normative principles? I know we have that kind of norms in our intergovernmental work, in our policy work, but can we have that kind of engagement also with the private sector? And indeed also with other CSOs and with other people's movements. What is our charter going as the feminist movement and feminist funders to those stakeholders, and what are your thoughts?
Just one question of branding, if it could be, because that's another concern that all of us have, is the corporate requirement, and somewhere CSR also gets connected to marketing. And how does one look at the whole issue of branding around social issues? So, can you talk about that?
Since I will request all my panelists to kind of make a summary of responses to the many questions, because it's not very possible, and it's closing remarks. And I welcome all of you to meet the panelists after we close the session, have lunch with them, be in touch with them, and to take your conversation forward.
So quickly, I've just noted on the points, there was a point around curriculum. Our curriculum is based on NCF, like everywhere else. We follow the state board in our elementary schools, CBSE for our K-12 schools, right? But what is important is that the design of teaching and learning, it's activity-based learning, so it's structured accordingly, and the methodology is such that it facilitates teaching and learning in the villages, where we have problems both at the children's end in terms of their learning levels when they come into the school, so remedial programs, and also the teachers that we get in terms of quality, where we have to work a lot upon that. The second thing you spoke about was mindsets. Obviously, it's challenging. When I say that it's changed, it doesn't mean that it's changed forever. These issues will remain. We'll have to keep fighting with all that. I was just sharing as to what difference education can make. It doesn't mean that we found a solution and everything is transformed overnight. It's a long drawn out process. Your point about government schools, of course, we've started work with government schools. I spoke about that. We're working on quality improvement programs. More importantly, wherever our schools are, it's putting pressure on the government schools. Communities now understand what quality education is, so they're demanding it. Teachers from government schools in a lot of our schools are coming in to see as to what are we doing in the schools? Why are kids coming here and not coming to their schools? So that kind of, indirect pressure is also happening. And like I clearly stated that now more and more work, we are on the verge of signing MOUs with a number of state governments where we will bring in our processes and systems there. All right. Now, employee engagement, you mentioned that. It's part of our, entire DNA where employee engagement, volunteering is encouraged. Employees wherever possible go and visit our schools. They work around that. We've got structured programs. Where our schools are not there, we help them in structuring employee engagement programs with NGOs of their choice there. Right. More importantly, we have an employee philanthropy program called ACT, a Caring Touch. It's an acronym for that, where employees are encouraged to donate time or money, and if it is money, the company gives a matching grant to the chosen NGO. Bharti Foundation is one of 14 which is on the list. There was, I think, another point about CSR, our responsibility as to, how we exercise that and how corporates are supposed to do that. I think, is it a fact that that corporates are not taking action on various issues which are staring at them in the face? Of course it is, but I'm sure that it will start happening and changing with time. Like I said, corporate India is in adolescence. Money has just come in the last 20 years. People have made it to the billionaire list in the last 10 years or so. So attitudes are changing. I mean, these are things which are unacceptable. They need to change much faster than they are now. And I'm sure that these issues will be taken up and addressed. Both pressure from around and also pressure from within and the desire to make a change. The question on branding is not necessarily true. I mean, CSR is not about marketing. Some corporates try and take advantage of that. I'm sorry that I'm giving an example of our own company. I'm sure most of you did not even know that Bharti Foundation existed. We could have used it in all our Airtel ads and said a caring touch or the complete man or whatever, and this is what our schools are doing. We never did that. So we're not mixing branding, which is about the customer and the product, and with the work that we do. In some cases it happens. IDEA uses it. What we do, IDEA uses it in the ads, but they don't do anything in terms of CSR in that area. So it's nice, it's just promoting their brand. So it's not necessarily that it's linked. You spoke about measuring the complete man. We've used external agencies for our academic indicators in terms of learning levels, etc. We do that once in 2 years. Like I told you, we had Ernst & Young to do a social impact assessment, which has happened once. Next time I get money for that, I'll probably do that. So that's the only indicator that we have, and of course, the person is there to see. I think how do schools become institutions, and how do institutions remain institutions? I think there's a lot of it, tradition, culture, etc., which goes into it. No, the Bharti Foundation is a universal platform. Bharti is the primary and major funder. We have a lot of individual donors. We have over 100 corporate donors and partners who partner with us, international and Indian.
Right. So on the question of influencers, and I think it was your question. I think if you look at the English language media in this country, the national papers and television channels, with the exception of the Hindu, across the board on economic issues, they're all right of center. They're all pro-economic reform. On social issues, they're all left of center. They're all for progressive. When it's issues of love jihad, when it's issues of gender, masculinity, they will always be, at least the attempt is, and I'm saying here from the experience from inside Newsroom, that the idea is to do that. Now they might falter in the way they do it, they might not understand the issue, they might report it very badly. That's a different thing. I'm talking about the intent and the policy. That is absolutely left of center. On economic issues, absolutely right of center. Everybody's pro-economic reform, except with the exception of the Hindu. That's one. To link with what you were talking about gender sensitive and how does that apply, I think part of the issue is, it's what one of the communication theorists once said, that, the job of the media is not necessarily to deliver messages to audiences, but to deliver advertisers to audiences. And I think if you look at, for example, in the last month alone, I think one of the most read story on the Times of India website was a story on a report which said that one of the ways to avoid prostate cancer is to have sex with more women. And that became the most watched read story on Times of India that week, on a week which was a very political week. So there's always this constant tension between what your audiences want from what they're telling us, and now you can measure it. Earlier we used to measure it from audience surveys, which were always subjective, which were always, there were always question marks about those surveys. You can now measure it down to the level of each individual consumer online, whether on mobile phones and on internet, and that's telling us that the audience is, whether it's for television or whether it's for online or whether it's for print, the audiences are, their tastes are far more puerile than what we ever imagined. So how do you manage that constant tension between your commercial imperative of surviving as a business, and media is a business, make no mistake about it, irrespective of the self-image of the media and its projection, except for public broadcasters. How do you manage that tension and your social responsibility, because it's not a normal business, it's got a real social role. So that is something you grapple with every day, and different companies and different editors deal with that in their own ways. But to answer your specific question, I'll refer to the Raymond ad that you talked about. I'm not sure I would go along entirely with the Raymond analogy, but Raymond from the 1980s, for those of us who don't know, from the 1980s has run this campaign that it's a clothing company. It's defined its entire advertising and its imagery around the idea of a complete man. It was always a man who was very macho, very well dressed, and so on. But recently, the new ad is about this guy with his wife in his car, and the wife keeps going back to the house because and we don't know what it is, and eventually what it is they have a baby in the house. So that ad ends with the guy going and finally saying, okay, it ends with the wife driving away in the car to wherever they're going, and the guy holding the baby and looking after the baby. So I think things are changing, and that is and that is partly because the tyranny of the mass audience that we can now measure. We also now know that there are enough audiences which are progressive, who want this kind of thing, along with your own social imperative to do social good. So I think a lot of advertising companies are moving to that, not because they want to, but because that's also a genuine social need. So that's 2. 3, on your point, Anita, and yours, Rashmi, I think, number 1, I think if we think that this is only happening in Hindi and regional channels, we are wrong. It happens in all the elite English channels and English newspapers too. I'm talking about sexual harassment and so on. There are umpteen number of star editors I can name who have huge reputations around them, and there's a conspiracy of silence around them. But I think it happens more. It might come out more in the Hindi and the regional networks, partly because in the English networks, a lot of the women who work in the English networks are more socially upwardly mobile. They're more aware of issues. So it's now become increasingly more difficult. As opposed to 10 years back, I think we're in a better world now than we were 10 years ago as far as the English language media is concerned. But for Hindi and regional, of course, recently there was an example of a Sun TV anchor as well, who not only lost her job, she couldn't get any other job after that. And I know of examples in the Hindi language press, in the television as well. And I think part of the problem is what you were talking about, that people don't know about this. But it's not enough to know about it. It's not enough for a company to have it. And you can solve it by sending 10 emails, right? Or by doing a sensitization workshop once in 6 months. But part of the issue is that most of these committees are fixed committees. And so there, I think what Justice Verma recommended was correct, that don't have these internal committees, have an external tribunal, which is also what Dipankar Gupta and his group recently recommended for labor reforms. They've recently pointed out there's a new move to a labor reform, and Dipankar's study, for example, points out that for labor disputes, you should have independent tribunals which are sanctioned by the board of a company, and you're bound to act on their advice. I think the same thing is required for women in the workplace, because, and I know this for a fact from my own experience, that many of these internal committees are fixed. In fact, we had a case in one of the companies I worked for, and I was involved in that, and the conversation there, I was not part of that committee, but I know the conversation around the committee and among the senior management about that committee was, it wasn't about how to do this committee job properly, it was about how to save this guy. So that's a genuine issue.
Thank you, Nalin.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to actually start from you. And it's a good question you asked, that what does empowerment look like? And honest to God, I don't know. I always thought empowerment should be for people who are weak. So unless we're seeing women are weak in themselves and have been sitting by the roadside marginalizing themselves, they don't need empowerment. We all agree there's an institutional issue. Women are not out of the development sector because they're weak. They're out because the development frame doesn't take into consideration. In fact, stands on the fact that they can be exploited. Stands on the labor because they can be exploited. So I have never understood the term empowerment, despite working with Mahila Samakya, which says empowerment through education for the first 3 years of my life. But I don't know what it means. I know what human rights mean. I know what it means to ensure that women realize their human rights. That I get. I don't know what empowerment means. And then I just want to respond to the monitoring and evaluation conversation, largely because right now it is a global conversation. And as women's rights activists, as advocates for the women's movement, we've been really pushing that envelope. That what does it mean when we say monitoring and evaluation? What does it mean to do it in binaries, in log frames, in 23 pages report for a grant which is $5,300 and you write forever till you die and you're still writing on that one project you did 10 years ago. So how do we challenge that? And there is actually a global project which is funded by private funders, including Oak Foundation, Foundation for Just Society and Wellspring Advisors, Global Fund and Mama Cash, to actually look at what, and actually ties into what Mr. Vijay Chadha also said, that at the moment when we look at the CSR requirements of reporting, well, actually, Mr. Chadha, the women's groups, in fact, all NGOs are dealing with reports in 23 different kinds of nuances on an everyday basis. In fact, much of the funding gets directed into documenting and gets directed into writing the reports rather than actually getting the work done and not paying the people who are doing it. That's one big conspiracy. Somehow just do it voluntarily, do it by yourselves, don't tell us how you're making your money. And if your children are going without milk, good luck to you. So, I mean, the whole piece around how are we looking at people who are doing the social justice work, who are on the ground, and there is a real need to actually deal with that piece. So yes, there is, that's something that we can share later. And welcome. Thank you so much. We've really been trying to have this discussion, and we started last October at the Ford Foundation office when we were bringing together a lot of grant makers as well as activists and implementing organizations and talking about how we can work together in collaboration. And how do we, and there is a time, and definitely Sunita is, as you know, on our board, and we are also privileged to have Priya Paul, who is a corporate on our board, who actually makes a grant to 4 legal fellows, 4 women lawyers every year, $20,000 to support the work they do pro bono for women's rights. So that's something we have, and she says, all I want is stories, don't give me reports. So that's the good practice to take from that and collaborate further. Yeah, thank you.
Those now, having heard very stimulating presentations and questions from the floor, it's very hard to summarize a session like this because the questions are still there. And there have been some very big questions that have come up in terms of how are we changing the norms within the industry, how are we portraying, issues of rights within the media. We're also looking at what are the kinds of mechanisms that can keep such dialogues going. And I think for those of us who are in India, I think it would be a great idea to have a forum, a partnership forum, where people from different streams of industry and media and activism and academia come together, because there's always so much to learn from each other and to find ways for each one of us to relearn and change our practices and norms. And I think this is important message that we should take back. I think, Mr. Chadha, we would look forward to what are the kinds of partnership forums that could be created. And Nalin, with your very dynamic leadership within the media industry, along with the Women's Future Service, if conversations can take place in some of these cutting-edge new questions that are coming up on masculinities, gender, equality, I think there's a lot that can be done. To each one of you, thank you, all of you, thank you, the panelists. I would like to close the session and look forward to many more in time to come.